Now, 1,000 Chinese Communist Party-linked spy cameras, I shouldn't laugh, have been found across government buildings, mainly in Canberra. Now, although Defence Minister Richard Marles has ordered their removal, there are some concerns that data could have already been sent back or fed back to Beijing. I find this story like the script out of a bad Hollywood spy movie. So I thought we'd get someone to know whether this is actually happening or not to join us. We're joined by Professor John Blaxland from the Strategic and Defence Studies Centre at ANU. Now, John, is this a real risk, do you think, to the Australian public? And do you think these cameras could be being used this way?
So it's very interesting, Steve. Thanks for having me on. We live in a world that's connected. We've gone from being web-enabled to web-dependent and in turn web-vulnerable. And we're living in a world where there's the so-called Internet of Things, where light bulbs, cameras, they're all connectable. And when it comes to some of the Chinese companies, of course, they're subject to legislation in China where they, despite whatever protests they might make, they're obliged to share data with the state authorities. And the thing is that with Mike Burgess, the Director General of ASIO, warning about this capability, you have to take it very, very seriously. He's an expert in this field. He came across from the Australian Signals Directorate, where he was a cybersecurity guru, came across to ASIO, and he's reshaped ASIO to steer them more into this space, to recognise that we are exposed on a number of levels. Now, we know China has got this capability. Other companies do too, but the problem with the Chinese one is the fact that they've got the conduit back to China where the information can be passed. Now, I haven't seen proof of it being passed, but the capability is there, and that's the point, and that's what's driving this rethink about the purchasing and use of these internet web-enabled devices that look good, sound great, but in practice probably problematic.
Well, John, when you think about it, I mean, if you go back not that far back in history, we did ban Huawei being involved in Australian telecommunications for that very reason, didn't we?
Yeah, that's right. And the problem is with 5G communications, you know, it's not, you can't really separate out, you can't compartmentalise components of a system of the communications architecture. It's all kind of interlinked. It's a bit of a mesh system. And that does make it much more difficult to protect if you've got a system like that is responsive to edicts coming out of Beijing. And effectively, that's what we're looking at here. And so I think it's a reasonable step. You know, we've heard Kim Beazley, the chairman of the board of the War Memorial, speak to this. And I think Richard Marles is making the right call. Senator Patterson was right to call it. You know, the response in Senate, I heard just before, you know, does raise the question why it was installed in the first place beforehand. But anyway, we are where we are. We've got to address what we face today, and it's got to be done, I think.
Well, I heard some commentary on this earlier today, John, and one of the reasons why all of these cameras, and there's two particular brands that come out of China, have been installed and are being used is because they're cheaper. Like a lot of things that we buy that are imported from China, they're cheaper. And Australian manufacturers of this technology, I heard on Talkback Radio today saying, well, we'd love to supply these cameras, but we can't do it as cheap as the Chinese, and so we're priced out of the market. Maybe the government needs to look at that.
Well, exactly right. When we have there's the principal criteria, the lowest price, the lowest bidding price, then you're going to get this kind of problem. We're starting to get there, and I think, you know, we've seen a bit of a transformation in our thinking with the establishment of the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, greater exposure to Medibank, you know, and all the kind of cyber attacks we've been exposed to, much greater awareness across community now of the cyber risks we face, and the need to actually be smart about this and not just go for the cheapest bidder, regardless of where he comes from. It's not just about being effective, or being efficient, it's about being protected and secure.
So I shouldn't worry if I go down to Mitre 10 at the weekend and I buy a camera and it's Chinese made. I mean, they're not interested in what I might be doing, but I think this work by Senator Patterson is probably a very good thing that he's done. Can I just ask you briefly about MH17, this incident back in 2014? We all remember how horrific that was. There seems to now be some new leads, some indication Vladimir Putin actually supplied the missile that shot that plane down. Is there any fresh evidence here And of course, I mean, Putin's never going to face the music over this, but have investigators got these claims right? Do we know?
So circumstantial evidence is pretty compelling in pointing to Putin being involved. The problem is that evidence before a court of law has to be proven beyond reasonable doubt. And that's very difficult to do when the Russian government and Putin himself are deflecting, obfuscating and refusing to cooperate. So that's just very, very difficult to go beyond the point which the courts have already done, which is to just declare we're pretty confident that this is the case, but the legal limits of procedure prevent us going further. So it's pretty damning. This is almost at the anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. And so we're seeing now, I think, we're on the cusp of another Russian offensive. It's really important that we be mindful that this is the same Putin who did that, who was involved in that odious act in 2014, for which he has not been held to account. And that people, there's people out there saying, oh, maybe we should just cut Putin and Russia some slack and maybe we shouldn't be so supportive of Ukraine. I'm afraid that I'm not of that camp. I'm strongly of the believer that weakness invites adventurism, and it has in the past, and we need to be strong in supporting Ukraine at this juncture especially, because we don't want to see more MH17 type incidents happen. We need to be looking to prosecute this as best we can with further sanctions wherever that's possible, and making clear to the government of Russia and other like-minded ones, be they from Iran or elsewhere, who might be contemplating similar kinds of actions, that what goes around comes around, and it does not pay to line yourself up with this kind of behaviour from the thug in Russia.
Well said, John. It was great to pick your brains. Thank you very much.